Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, July 20th, 2023. I am thrilled to be with you tonight and to be able to share some Torah learning. This past Sunday was the 13th Yartzeit of Rabbi Yehuda Amital of blessed memory. I have shared much with you that I have learned from Rabbi Amital, both his lessons, his essays, stories. What I'd like to share with you this evening is particularly relevant to what we are doing together now. And it's not just a lesson that Rabbi Amital taught, it is a reflection of how he lived his life. So this week's Torah portion, our Parsha, Devarim, is the beginning of the fifth book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, Devarim. And it's mostly a series of farewell speeches that Moshe delivers to the Jewish people before he dies and before they enter Israel. And they're entering Israel to begin a new chapter in Jewish history with the creation of a revolutionary society based on God's commands and values. Such a thing had never existed before. And so it starts with the following words: Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people. Hashem Elokeinu diber aleinu b'chorev lemar. God spoke to us while we were still back at Mount Sinai. This is almost 40 years earlier. Rav lachem sheves b'har hazeh. You spent enough time here. It's time for you to go directly into Israel. So remember, this is almost 40 years earlier. And Moshe starts his speeches with recalling the Jews about 40 years earlier at Mount Sinai. And they're supposed to go directly into the land of Israel. This is until the debacle of the spies, when God decrees that they're going to have to wander for a total of 40 years in the desert. So the first speech that Moshe gives is to warn the people, you're about to go into the land of Israel, don't ever do that again, what you did with the spies almost 40 years ago. Don't ever reject God's gift. Don't ever lose faith in God's promise, etc., the other lessons that we learn from that narrative. Okay. But the quote that I shared a moment ago was not complete. There are a few additional words in the middle. In fact, there are 80 additional words, all in one sentence, that breaks every rule of English grammar and style. So here's the full quote. Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe spoke to the entire Jewish people, be'ever hayarden, while they were on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, bamidbar, in the desert, ba'arava, in the Arava, mul Suf, near a place called Suf, in the area of Paran and Tofel and Lavan and Chatzeros and Dizahav, which is an area which is 11 days' journey from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea by way of the Seir Mountains. On the first day of the 11th month in the 40th year, after the Jewish people had defeated Sichon, the king of Emori, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaros, who was defeated in a place called Edrei, Moshe began to explain this law on the eastern bank of the Jordan in the land of Moab, saying, okay, after 80 words, God, Hashem, Elokeinu, Diber, Eleinu, B'chorei, Lemor. God spoke to us 40 years ago at Chorev, and he said it's time to go into Israel. Okay, what are all those words for? I mean, it's like a passage from James Joyce. Or maybe Alice in Wonderland. So Rav Amital addressed this question. Why is it that Moshe's speech is prefaced by such a long and detailed description of the exact place that they were, the exact time that it was happening, the historical circumstances of the moment that he spoke? Why 80 words to begin the speech? And Rav Amital answers, when a person involves themselves in Torah and mitzvos, they must never allow themselves to be cut off from the place and time in which they exist. A person must look around and think how best to apply their Torah learning to the circumstances around him. So this passage locates when it was, where it was, what was going on, because Moshe's Torah, the lesson that Moshe teaches, has got to reflect the time, the place, the circumstance. It's got to be applicable to that moment. Rabbi Reuven Ziegler writes, Rav Amital was animated by the sense that the Torah is relevant in every generation. Every generation is granted a new understanding of the Torah, one that is appropriate to that generation and necessary to address its challenges. It is our function, together, to try to uncover this understanding of how the Torah applies in our lives today. And one of my goals for these classes is that all of us should be able to say, yes, God's Torah does have something to say to me that is relevant and applicable in my life. And we will keep trying to discover that together. I am sure that everyone who participates in Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day of mourning, that's coming up this coming Wednesday night and Thursday, that commemorates the worst catastrophes in our history. I'm sure that everyone who participates in that has their own theme, their passage that hits the deepest, that hurts the most of the sadness and the tragedies. There is a theme that causes my heart to break, and it only starts to heal on Shabbos Nachamu, the Sabbath of consolation, the Shabbos that follows Tisha B'Av. The theme that I'm referring to is expressed this Shabbos and on Tisha B'Av itself, and it is devastating. This Shabbos we call Shabbos Chazon. Chazon means vision, and it derives its name from the Haftorah, the passage from the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah the prophet. It's the opening of Isaiah, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz. This is the vision of Isaiah the prophet. Asher Chaza al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. This is the vision that Isaiah was given by God to prophesize what was going to happen to Yehuda, to Judah, to Israel, and to Jerusalem. And this passage that we read this Shabbos as the Haftorah is an indictment of the Jews at the end of the First Temple period, a litany of their sins, their crimes, their immorality, and how God feels about them and responds to them. And of course, the ultimate response that God has is the Churban, the destruction of the temple, the razing of Jerusalem, and the exile of the Jewish people to Babylonia. But in the course of this painful passage, we read the following words. Ubefareschem kapechem, and when you spread your hands in prayer to me, God says, Alim einai mikem, I will hide my eyes from seeing you. Gam ki sarbus fila, even when you engage in lengthy and heartfelt prayer, eineni shomea, I will not listen. Yedechem damim maleu, because your hands are filled with blood. God, you mean to say you won't even listen to our prayers? Where else can we turn in our suffering if you, God, tell us that you will ignore us? What possible hope do we have? And then on Tisha B'Av this year, this Wednesday night, we read Eicha, the Book of Lamentations, written by Yirmiyahu Hanafi, the prophet Jeremiah. And there we read, Gam ki ezak va'ashavea, even when I cry out to God in prayer, sosam tfilasi, God closes my prayer. Even when I cry out in pain and desperation and remorse, you, God, close up my prayer. You, God, are closed to my cries. And when I read that, I feel totally abandoned, alone, afraid, and even disappointed. I imagine that many of you may be able to relate to this, but I will just speak about myself. I certainly have been in situations where I felt like this, where I felt that God was refusing to hear me. And I felt a loneliness and a sadness unlike any other. And there are times when we as a community, as a people, feel this, during the Holocaust, for example. Many of us felt this way 9 years ago, when 3 Jewish boys were kidnapped in Israel near Efrat. And for days we prayed. We gathered here at ADATH, in synagogues all over the world, in our homes, at mass gatherings at the Kotel, and elsewhere. And many of us prayed like never before that these boys would be found, that they would be alive, that they would be okay, that they would be returned to their families. Because there was a feeling around the world that these boys were our boys, our sons. And we prayed like crazy. Until the day we learned they had been murdered by terrorists. And we grieved and mourned for our boys, for our sons. And some of us asked, will we ever pray again? Should we pray again? Will it help? Or will God continue to ignore us like he did then? We prayed and prayed, and they were killed. What happens to our prayers? when the answer is no? Are those prayers in vain? Are they useless? When this happened 9 years ago, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb spoke publicly to address this question. And allow me to share with you some of what he said. The first thing he said is that it is impossible for us to know what to say in a circumstance, in a situation like this. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in our prayers, we say, Heyeh im pifios shluchei amcha beis Yisrael. God, be with the tongues of your people Israel. Hore ma sheyomeru. Teach us what to say, because we don't know what to say. It's so difficult, it's so important, and we do not know what to say. But at the same time, there is another passage that we say on Yom Kippur at Ne'ilah, near the end of the day, Tamachti yesedosai b'shlosh esrei tevos. I put my faith in the 13 attributes, in the prayer asking for repentance. Ubeshare demos kilonish lavos, and in the gates of tears which never close. Our sages tell us that even if it should happen that the gates of prayer close, but the gates of tears, of heartfelt emotional prayers, that never closes. So how is it possible? Why were our tears and our prayers for these 3 boys, why were they not answered? And what happened to those prayers? What happened to those tears? And Rabbi Weinreb pointed out it is not a lack of faith to ask this question, to question God, even to challenge God. Moshe challenged God. Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah, challenged God. Rabbi Akiva challenged God, our greatest heroes. Question and challenge God. Especially when they ask this question about why the righteous suffer. And the answer that is repeated in the Torah is that we will not see this question resolved in this world until Mashiach comes, until the Messianic era. And until then, all that is left to us is tziduk hadin, to say that God is righteous even when we don't understand. Hatzur tamim pa'olo. God, the rock, his actions are perfect. Even when we have doubts, even when we are angry, Hashem hu Elokim. God is the Lord. Okay, it may not be very satisfying, but what happened to all those prayers? Were they in vain? Were they useless since we did not get the result we requested? And the answer that Rav Weinreb gave, loudly and emphatically, no, that is not correct, for many reasons. Our prayers were heard, and they had an impact in many ways. Ways that we cannot know because we would have to be God to know, but also in ways that are open and obvious to us. During those 18 days between the kidnapping and the burial of these 3 boys, Jews all over the world opened their hearts to the pain of other human beings. Was there anyone praying for those boys at that time who did not imagine suffering, the suffering that those boys went through, who didn't identify with their parents, who didn't admire the courage and dignity, especially of the three mothers of these boys, if you remember. We live in an age of narcissism, materialism, when it is so difficult to get the scent of the spiritual. It's almost impossible. And for those 18 days, people kept their hearts open to the pain of others. This is not in vain. Those actions, those prayers by themselves make us a better person, a more sympathetic person, a more compassionate person. And the transformation that occurred within us is powerful and enduring. And that is the goal of prayer. To transform ourselves. To make ourselves better people. That's a goal that is independent of getting what we request. Also, many people learn for the first time what it really means to pray. Even if they pray every day, many people said that their prayers during those days were longer, more heartfelt. We said the words of the Amidah, Shema Kolenu, God listened to our prayers with an intensity that many of us never had before. Many people learned for the first time to cry as part of their prayer. Many people, especially men in our society who are often taught, don't cry. There was a spiritual purging that sincere tears enables. Our prayers were not in vain. They were successful in unleashing spiritual energy within us. Many of us learned in those days how to compose our own prayers, our own words, our own language, and that is what prayer should be. The Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin writes, don't be satisfied that you said 3 prayers a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. That's not enough. You must pray many times from the depth of your heart in your own words, in addition to the printed words that we read. Such prayers produce powerful focus with broken hearts and with contrite spirits. Rachel Frankiel, the mother of one of the boys, said, God doesn't work for me just because I'm praying with all my heart. It might help. I believe it could help, especially when thousands and millions are praying. They are. But nobody owes me anything. And if tomorrow, God forbid, I'll hear the worst news, I don't want my children to feel, where did all my prayers go? And so an experience like this gives us a task. We can't let these gains be lost. We have to hold on to them. We must commit that we will build on these tears and understand that there will be more. And hopefully, we will learn how to perpetuate these gains. At that time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke addressing the families of these 3 boys after they were found to have been murdered. And he was reflecting on the previous 18 days, this outpouring of prayer and concern all over the world. And he said, a whole nation stood together and got a reminder of who we are, why we are here, and no less, what great strengths are found within us. A young man named Nitai, a friend of two of the boys, Gilad and Naphtali, spoke at their funeral. And he said, in the process of looking so hard for you, in the end, we found ourselves. We succeeded in our prayers. This is the goal of prayer. And so we continue to pray. The observances and emotions of mourning and loss we, the Jewish people, go through during these days leading up to and including Tisha B'Av are the same that each of us goes through when, God forbid, we suffer the loss of a loved one. And we have been taking this time over the last several days as an opportunity to learn more deeply about the Jewish process of mourning and comforting mourners. And I'd like to focus tonight briefly on what to say. If we visit someone sitting Shiva, God forbid, or we see someone who is grieving, what do we say and what do we not say? And this is extremely important because I hear from many people that due to their discomfort over what to say, they stay away. But there is a mitzvah, there is a commandment in the Torah of nichum avelim, to comfort mourners. So we must share guidelines on how to do this. Tonight I want to share briefly from two sources. One may be familiar to you, the other probably not. In 2015, Dave Goldberg died suddenly at the age of 47. His wife, now widow, is Sheryl Sandberg. She's a famous person. At that time, she was second in command at Facebook, the best-selling author of the book Lean In. She wrote another book about her experience after her husband Dave died, titled Option B. I urge you to read it. In an interview, she addressed the discomfort over what to say and the fear of saying the wrong thing. And she said, the worst thing is not when people say something wrong. It's when they say nothing at all. She wrote, a rabbi recently told me that the most powerful one-line prayer he ever read is, let me not die while I am still alive. I didn't understand that at first, but now I do. She explained when tragedy occurs, it presents a choice. You can give in to the void, the emptiness that fills your heart, or you can try to find meaning. And she wrote, so I am sharing what I have learned in the hope that it helps someone else, in the hope that there can be some meaning from this tragedy. She writes, I have learned that I never really knew what to say to others in need. I tried to assure people that it would be okay, thinking that hope would be the most comforting thing that I could offer. But a friend of mine with late-stage cancer told me the worst thing people could say to him was, it's going to be okay. Because, he explained, the voice in my head would scream, how do you know it's going to be okay? It's not going to be okay. Don't you understand? I'm about to die. Real empathy, Sandberg wrote, is sometimes not insisting that it will be okay, but acknowledging that it is not. Even a simple, how are you, almost always asked with the best of intentions, is better replaced with, how are you today? When I'm asked, how are you? I have to stop myself from shouting, my husband just died. How do you think I am? When I hear, how are you today? I realize the person knows that the best I can do right now is to just get through each day. I learned that whatever rug you are standing on can be pulled right out from under you with absolutely no warning. I learned to ask for help. And I learned how much help I need. I learned that resilience can be learned. Adam Grant taught me that 3 things are critical to resilience and that I can work on all 3. Personalization, realizing it's not my fault. Permanence, realizing I won't feel like this forever. This will get better. Pervasiveness, this does not have to affect every area of my life. The ability to compartmentalize is healthy. I learned gratitude. Real gratitude for the things I took for granted before, like life. As heartbroken as I am, I look at my children each day and rejoice that they are alive. I appreciate every smile, every hug. I no longer take each day for granted. And she concluded, as Bono sang, there is no end to grief, and there is no end to love. Rabbi Baruch Liederman is a rabbi that I know. At one time, he was a rabbi of a synagogue in California. I have shared with you many of his excellent divrei Torah, stories, jokes. In 1991, Rabbi Liederman and his wife Debbie, they suffered the death of their 3-month-old son, Shlomo Moshe, who died suddenly for no apparent reason, SIDS. And while they were sitting Shiva and people would come to visit and offer words, he wrote them down. Insights. He kept a journal. And I will share just a few of the many meaningful insights that he recorded. He told the story. It was a Shabbos afternoon in February. He and his wife were eating Shabbos lunch. Shlomo Moshe, the baby, was sleeping in a crib in the same room. His wife benched first so that she could lay down to take a nap before the baby woke up. She got up from the table. She looked at the baby. Baby was fine, and she went to bed to take a nap. I benched, said the Birkat HaMazon. About 10 minutes later, I went over to look at the baby, and I saw that he was blue. I called Hatzalah ambulance. And while waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I did CPR. It turned out, he writes, to be an opportunity to give a last hug and kiss to my baby. They rushed to the hospital. They tried to revive the baby. The baby passed away. Came back home. It was a little bit before Shabbos was over. He and his wife sat while it was still Shabbos before the chaos that would ensue as soon as Shabbos was over and people started to hear about this. And he says, Debbie, his wife, had the presence of mind to tell me that the death of a child can bring a couple closer to God and closer to each other, or it can drive them from God and from each other. And she concluded simply with, let us choose closer. I learned what is the right thing to say to someone who is sitting Shiva. People are often afraid to visit someone who is sitting Shiva because they don't know what to say. What can I possibly say to help this person who just suffered this devastating loss? I am here to tell you, Rabbi Liederman writes, that it doesn't matter what you say. As long as you are sad about the death and express it in any way at all, it will give enormous comfort. We found that when a person came to visit us, we could feel the comfort right away just by seeing the expression on their face or hearing the tone in their voice. I learned from this experience that it doesn't matter what you say, and it doesn't matter that you can't possibly understand what the mourner is going through. So don't worry about that. If you are sad, the mourner will feel a little better. Incredible. If you are sad, the mourner will feel a little better. Some people said all the right things, yet it didn't have much of an effect on us. Some people said all the wrong things, yet it made us feel better. At the end of the day, the only thing that mattered was the emotion each person exuded. I learned from my experience that it helps the mourner to focus on the deceased. So when I pay a Shiva call, I speak about the person who passed away. I ask about the person who passed away. And finally this. Rabbi Liederman writes, you will eventually feel normal again. He had a friend, another rabbi. This other rabbi and his wife also suffered the death of a child. And when this rabbi came to visit during Shiva, he said that we will eventually feel normal again. I didn't believe him when he said this. But eventually I did start to feel normal again. Now, Rabbi Liederman writes, I tell people sitting Shiva that they will eventually feel normal again, and I am sure they do not believe me. But it's still true. And I say the same to you and to me and to the entire Jewish people. We too will also feel normal again. Even if right now we don't even realize that we don't feel normal, we will. We as a people will feel normal again. Please God, may it be soon. May this be the last Tisha B'Av that is a day of sadness, instead turned into a day of joy and redemption. My friends, I wish you a great evening and a wonderful Shabbos. I hope that you have an easy but meaningful fast and experience on Tisha B'Av. And I look forward, together with you, to the final redemption, when our tears are dried and all our prayers are answered.